Hey everyone, and welcome back to Joey's Retro Handhelds. I'm Joey, and today we're going to go deeper than any man has ever gone before on Syncthing for Android handhelds, and more specifically, AYN and Retroid devices. So, why them? Well, they both have direct access to Android's data storage, and it allows you to sync Dolphin for GameCube and Wii, NetherSX2 for PS2, RPCSX for PS3, CMU for Wii U, Switch, and so on. You don't have any limits. Ambernick's Android build doesn't allow you, although Gamma OS likely does, and others like AYN have trouble with this as well. So, long story short, I know it works on Retroid and AYN devices, so that's why I'm going to focus today's guide on those. But you are welcome to try this on any other device. Now, you might be thinking that I did this guide already, and you would be right. A few months ago, I did a full setup guide on Syncthing, and this is going to be a sequel to that. So you would want to use that first video and guide as a starting point, because I'm going to assume that you have some familiarity with Syncthing today. This won't be a complete beginner's guide, and I'm not going to explain every little thing in today's video. You've been warned, this is more advanced. Honestly, I just figured that Syncthing needs a more practical video of somebody talking you through how it all works and how I actually use it, rather than reading off a script and a setup guide. It is a bit more complicated than that. So, to follow along today, I'm going to assume that you have used Syncthing. Maybe you have at least one sync going, and you understand enough to at least set that up, and that'll be the bare minimum. Okay, so let me walk you through how I have Syncthing set up for each emulator, how it syncs to other devices, and how it syncs to even my Windows devices, and so on. I'm going to give you some nice ideas, share some tips and tricks, and how it all can work for your Retroid or AYN device or PC handheld. So let's go one by one so you know the paths for each emulator. And I'm going to share what I have on Android and where it corresponds to on PC handhelds, and then how my Syncthing PC looks to put them all together. So for 3DS, I actually use the AZAHAR emulator on both Android and PC. And the path on Android for me is just my AZAHAR folder. And you have to create a folder when you first install AZAHAR. So it'll be different for everybody as far as the name goes and where you put it. I have mine on the SD card. Now the path on PC is in your app data, roaming, AZAHAR folder. Personally, I sync the cheats folder and the SDMC folder. SDMC is where all of the data is, saves, updates, DLC, everything. I can go back and forth from PC to Android with no issues with all of this. Now for Dolphin on Android, all of the data is located on the internal storage, Android, data, com.dolphinmu.dolphinmu, I think sometimes it's org.dolphinmu, and the GC folder has the GameCube saves, while the Wii title folder has the Wii saves. There's a title folder inside of Wii, that's the one you'd want to sync. I also sync game settings, which is cheats, there's widescreen gecko codes, and any special configs. The path on PC is the app data, roaming, Dolphin emulator folder. They both share the same structure, so it's the same thing. I go back and forth between Android and PC devices, sharing all of the same data. For NetherSX2, the data is located on the internal storage, Android, data, XYZ AetherSX2, Android, files folder. I personally like to sync the cheats folder, game settings, mem cards, and S-states. Now on PC, it is PCSX2, and that is in your documents folder in the PCSX2 folder. Now I do go back and forth between PC and Android for PS2, but states will not work doing so. States will also not work from NetherSX2 to NetherSX2. So if you even wanted to do Android to Android, it will not work. So I've had success doing PC to PC state, so PCSX2 to PCSX2, and that's why I personally sync that. But if you're doing Android to Android, you could skip that one. For RPCS3, the data for Android is on the internal storage, Android, data, net, RPCSX, files, config, dev_hdd0 folder. I usually sync game and home. On PC, this would be in your RPCS3 folder, and then dev_htd0 and the same structure. Yeah, this also works cross-platform if you want to do RPCSX with this data. For PPSSPP, the data for Android would be in the PSP folder that you created when you installed PPSSPP. So I have my PPSSPP folder on the SD card, and inside of that, there's a PSP folder, and I sync the cheats, /0, which is fonts, PPSSPP_state, which is states, and save data, which is saves folders. Now on PC, for PPSSPP, it is the same structure. So your PPSSPP folder is usually in your documents folder, and then inside is the PSP folder. And again, there's no issues cross-platform, and I've had states work with PSP, so it's a good one. For RetroArch on Android, data is in the internal storage, RetroArch folder, and I typically sync cheats, config, saves, and states. Now, sometimes I don't really sync config because it could screw things up, but I keep forgetting to remove it from my Syncthing. Now, on PC, it is the same structure, so wherever your RetroArch folder is, the same folders are inside of that. One thing to note for saves and states with RetroArch, you need to use the same cores on all devices, and then you won't have any issues with loading the same saves and states. However, if you mix up the cores, it's not going to work. I actually solely use states when playing across all of my devices, and I have no issues, as long as they're the same cores. For Switch on Android, it depends which emulator you're using, but it would be in the internal storage, Android, data, whatever emulator, files folder. And I sync the load and NAND folders. Load has things like mods that you need for Link's Awakening and some other games, and NAND has all of your saves, your DLC, your updates, and pretty much everything else. Now on PC, again, it depends on whatever emulator you're using, but for me, it is just the user folder, and that has the load and NAND folders that I sync. Since I combine all of my Switch games to include DLC and updates into the one file, I don't have much size-wise in these folders. I don't really have any updates or DLC installed. But if you have been installing your DLC and updates, they'd be quite large, and you can still sync them though. For Vita 3K on Android, when you first install Vita 3K, it asks you where to save your files. So I put mine inside of a Vita 3K folder on the SD card. Then inside of that is a UX0 folder, and inside of that, you would want to sync the app, license, and user folders. App is your installed games. So once you install a game once into Vita 3K, you don't need to install it ever again. You can sync the app folder across all of your devices. License and user has your updates, your DLC, your saves, and your data. On PC, it is very much of the same. It asks you to create a folder to save data in on install, and then you go inside to the UX0 folder, and other folders are inside as well. I actually love syncing Vita 3K because it has all of my games and data installed. So I don't need to keep the original zips, and I don't need to install them every time I do a new device. For CMU on Android, data is on the internal storage, Android, data, info.cmu.cmu, files, MLC01, user folder. Save is your saves, title is updates and DLC and stuff. On PC, it is much of the same again. Wherever your CMU folder is, MLC01, user folder. Since I combine all of my ROMs with the game, DLC, and updates into one, same way I do it for Switch, there isn't any of that being stored for me here. It's all in the file. For Xenia Canary, and this is PC only, but it would just be your Xenia Canary folder. I sync config, content, and patches. Config is special configs, content is saves, and patches are the game patches. One quick hot tip, use the app Xenia Canary Manager. It is an awesome app, it keeps it up to date, and it does a whole bunch of other things. It is so good. Lastly, we can also sync ROMs. Yeah, I just blew your mind. We can sync ROMs. Actually, my favorite part of Syncthing is syncing ROMs. Why wouldn't you want to? I add a ROM to my PC or any device, and then it sends it to all of my devices. What can get better than that? There is no path for this one, really. On Android, on my SD card, I have a ROMs folder, and inside of that is all of my system folders. So that ROMs folder is actually what I sync, and then on other devices, it's the same thing, and it could just be located anywhere on your PC. Okay, so at this point, you know the paths for pretty much all of the major emulators for Android and PC, and that's cool. But I haven't talked about how I add them, and what I do next, and what you do with those paths that I gave you. So let's look at my Syncthing PC. This might be a bit daunting, but you'll see that I basically have each emulator that we talked about here as a folder syncing right in Syncthing. You can also see where they're saving their data, and it's in my games folder on my C drive. And then each emulator or system is in there, and if you go in further, it's going to match each folder in Syncthing. So if we head into RetroArch, you can see that I have my cheats, config, saves, and states folders. And that's all stuff that we talked about earlier as things that I sync. And my master Syncthing PC that I have here has all of that data as a starting point. Now for reference, this is my Syncthing PC. It is my server. It's a 24/7 mini PC that I always have on. And it just made sense to use a 24/7 device for Syncthing because whenever I add a new device, I don't want to have to turn on another device to get them to sync. So it's useful if you have a device or a PC that's always on to start off with Syncthing there. You don't need to always have an always on device, but it helps because that's the easiest way to do it. But I assume that anybody watching this guide already has something like this set up already. But if not, it is as simple as using a single starting device and copying those folders over to whatever Syncthing server PC you're going to use, like I have here in the C drive games folder. And this could just be your starting point. This is your home Syncthing PC, and it's going to send out this data to every other device that you add. Now, let's say you just did that with RetroArch and you copied what I did. You moved over your RetroArch folder that has just cheats, config, saves, and states onto your PC. You would head into Syncthing, you would click Add Folder, navigate to that RetroArch folder and call it RetroArch, and you would choose it. I would do simple file versioning and then save. And there you go. That is your first actual folder in Syncthing, and you pretty much have it set up already to go, and we can start adding devices to sync to it. It's really not as daunting once you think about it that way. You don't need to have all of this set up the same way that I do, but if you have a PC handheld or a device that you've been using emulation on, you have all of your things to start with already. All I did to start was copy that data over from a PC handheld or a Retroid or an AYN to my PC, and that started my master list of saves and ROMs. Okay, so let's say you have all of this, or maybe you just have RetroArch working, and you're wondering what's next. Let me start off with the most common example, a brand new device. So I just got a Retroid Pocket Flip 2, let's pretend it's like 2 months ago, and it is brand new. I have installed RetroArch on it, and I have the RetroArch saves and all that on my PC, so it's all ready to go. Let's do it. So on the Flip 2, I'm going to install Syncthing Fork using Obtainium, or you could use the GitHub, doesn't matter. Head to Settings, and I usually turn on Auto Start, so Syncthing starts with the device. And then I choose Start Directly into Web GUI. And then let me show you what that means and why I chose that. If we go ahead and look at the main Syncthing Fork screen in Android, it is an Android UI, and it is awful. Not any fault on their part, but I'll show you why it's awful. You don't need to follow this part. This is for an example. I'm going to click Add Folder, and then I want to sync something behind Android's data storage. So let's say NetherSX2, which is a popular example. I click Directory, I head to Android, and oh no, where is data? We need to get into data. It's not here. What the hell? Now watch this. Instead, I head to Web GUI, I click Add Folder, and I start typing the internal storage, so storage/emulated/0/android/data, and oh, what's this? It shows up, and I can keep going. This is the #1 new person error I see everybody make, and it's why they think they can't sync NetherSX2 or Dolphin or Switch or anything. So long story short, always use Web GUI for everything and forget that the Android UI exists. Ignore it. Honestly, they should just remove it and just use the web GUI for everything because it's kind of crappy. Now, if you want an extra easy way to do this, instead of remembering the paths, I'm crazy and I know the paths because I'm a nerd, but you might not know the paths. You could use a File Explorer app like Solid Explorer, that's what I use, navigate to the path in that app, then just copy that path from that app, and you can paste it right into the web GUI path spot there. You don't need to write it out, and it'll work just as well. It's the little tips that count. But anyways, back to how I add RetroArch. So we have Syncthing installed. We are not going to use Android UI. We're going to use web GUI. RetroArch is of course installed and set up, but we need to do something first. Head to the RetroArch folder and decide what you're syncing. So for me, right now, it's going to be the cheats folder, the saves folder, and the states folder. And all of those are on my Syncthing PC already. We saw that earlier. Guess what? I'm going to delete all 3 folders on the flip too. We don't want any confusion for Syncthing. So boom, delete. Now I'm going to copy those 3 folders from my Syncthing PC that has them, and we want to sync to right to this device. I actually do this right in Solid Explorer using a LAN connection, but however you want to do it, if you want to connect it through USB-C to your computer and copy the files over, it's up to you. But that means once we're done copying, we have the same exact cheats, saves, and states files on the device and on the PC. It's a one-to-one copy. Now in web GUI, I click Add Remote Device, and I choose Nearby Device, which is my Syncthing PC, and I give it a name. I'm just going to call mine Joey PC. This is telling the master Syncthing PC that we want to connect. Then I head over to my Syncthing PC and open up Syncthing. I accept that invitation, and I can choose at this point what I want to share with the Flip 2. Now, I have a big list, as you saw before. Some things don't apply to Android or to a Flip 2, and some things do. So what exactly do I want to sync with a Flip 2? Well, for me, it'll be the 3DS, Dolphin, PS2, PS3, PSP, ROMs, RetroArch, Switch, Vita, and Wii U. Pretty much most of my list I want to sync, so I'm going to checkmark them all and then save. Depending on your device, you might just want to sync RetroArch, or ROMs, or both. So it's all up to you. In the future, if you create a new folder and you want to share it, just click that folder, click Edit, the Sharing tab, and then you can choose whatever device to share to, and whatever folder. Or you can remove it from sharing if you want. If we head back to the Flip 2, you're going to see that we got a whole bunch of notifications about adding folders. Once again, we're only going to do this in web GUI. Ignore the notifications. If we continue with our RetroArch example, since that's the one that we have already set up, let's accept that one, and then it's going to ask for the path. So it wants to know where is our RetroArch folder on Android. Once again, we talked about this earlier, just grab that RetroArch folder path, paste it in the paths, head over to the File Versioning tab, and we're going to select Simple. And then here is an advanced tip. Head over to the Ignore Patterns tab and enable it, and then click Save. It's going to pop you right back with a window to enter your Ignore Patterns. Here is probably the best tip of the day. For new users to Syncthing, you have probably been creating multiple folders for saves, cheats, states, whatever, and you probably have a long list of those. Instead, why don't you just sync one folder and then tell it what subfolders to sync inside of it? So, in the RetroArch folder, we only care about cheats, saves, and states. In Ignore Patterns, you can put an exclamation mark, cheats, exclamation mark, saves, exclamation mark, states, and then an asterisk on a new line. And what this is saying is that we only want to sync these folders and nothing else. So go ahead and click Save, and it'll save and sync, and you should see up to date, which means it's good. You can see how helpful Ignore Patterns is right away. But let's use a different example. ROMs. This is how I add ROMs to all of my devices. I create a folder called ROMs on the SD card or the internal storage. Then I transfer over whatever systems that I want from my Syncthing PC ROMs folder again to that device, because like RetroArch, we want one-to-one copies to start. When that's done, we do the same thing in Syncthing like RetroArch. Accept the ROMs folder, add path, point it to the ROMs folder, simple file versioning, and I enable ignore patterns. Now let me show you a different way to use ignore patterns. Before, we told it which folders we wanted specifically. How about this time we tell it which folders we don't want instead? So on my Flip 2, I don't want the Switch folder, I don't want an Xbox folder, and I don't want the Xbox 360 folder. So I write out those names on each line, and that tells Syncthing to ignore those folders and everything inside of them. And it syncs everything else. Now, alternatively, we could do it the same way that we did with RetroArch and put exclamation marks and then each of the ROM folders that I have, the system folders, but it's easier for me to exclude in this scenario than it is for me to write out all of the ROMs that I want. Let's do another example, Dolphin this time. I'm going to accept it, going to add the path that we talked about earlier, simple file versioning, and ignore patterns. Dolphin is actually an interesting one because we want the game settings folder, we want the GC folder, and then we want the title folder that is inside of the Wii folder. And you can just write out Wii/title to just sync the title folder that is inside of the Wii folder. And that way we only get those saves. It's nice and easy, so click Save again. Now for 3DS, you can just sync the SDMC folder with updates and DLC. It means you never need to install them ever again. And it's the same thing with Vita 3K. If you install all of your games, then you can sync that app folder. And we talked about this earlier, all of the different folders that I sync. So you can just throw all of those in ignore patterns to do all of this as well. But last tip on ignore patterns. Let's say, and I'm going to use Nether SX2 and PC SX2 in this example, but you have done ignore patterns for cheats, game settings, mem cards, and S states. And all of it's been working. It's been great. But you have just added HD textures to the Flip 2. And you now want to add that so it syncs to all of your other devices. So what do? So first, on your Syncthing PC, copy over the textures folder from your Flip 2 to the Syncthing PC. That way, once again, your Syncthing PC, which is your master record, has the right data and it's one-to-one copy. Then on any other device that you want to sync the textures folder to, just edit the folder in Syncthing, ignore Patterns tab, create a new line with an exclamation mark, textures, and save. It's going to sync it going forward. Alternatively, if you delete a line from ignore patterns, let's say you don't want to sync textures anymore, delete the line, save, and now whatever you do in that folder won't sync anymore. So it's great. But honestly, you can just continue adding all of your other emulator folders. Again, always delete the folders that you'll be syncing, copy the Syncthing PC data for that folder over, then accept the sync. Use ignore patterns to choose the folders that you want. And by the end, you should have your Flip 2 completely synced to your Syncthing PC or whatever devices you're using. Now, none of this changes on a PC handheld as well. It is the same scenario, or even Linux. You always want to have your master Syncthing PC, and that creates all of your new devices. So your master Syncthing PC or whatever device should have all of the data that you want to send to other devices. It is your singular copy of everything. And yeah, if your question is, does this work across operating systems? It does. I have my gaming PC, my GPD Win Mini 2025, my Android devices, my Linux devices, all of it is all synced up. It is pretty instant as well. The moment you save a game, by the time you make your way over to the other device, it's already synced, and so you can just boot up that game and continue on. That is all I have for you today. I'm going to be honest, I have no idea how well I explained this all. I did my best. It is a hard thing to make a video on. It is hard to get thoughts across, it is hard to explain, but I'm hoping this helps you out and hoping this gives you an idea of how I use it and maybe explain some things for you to understand. Don't forget to like and sub to help the channel grow. Come join me on the Discord to talk all about handhelds and retro handhelds and even Syncthing. Support me on Patreon if you like my stuff. And hope you all have a good one.